Good evening. My name is Ivan Holloway, and I serve as the Executive Director of Urban Impact Incorporated. We are a 501c3 nonprofit in downtown Birmingham, serving the African American Small Business District as well as the broader Civil Rights District. It gives me great pleasure to be with you this evening to talk a little bit about the African American history around small business and small business development. There are a number of unsung heroes that I think it's important that you know about. So today, with funding from the Alabama Humanities Foundation, Urban Impact will present a panel discussion around those unsung heroes entitled Nobody Knows My Name. So today, you will have an opportunity to participate through your viewership in this panel. And this panel is going to be led by Ms. Majella Chube Hamilton, who is the Executive Director of the Ballot House. So I invite you to learn a little bit more about the Ballot House project and all that it is involved in. But I will tell you, we've got an exciting afternoon today, and you will learn so much about African American history and the importance of the district and what it means to be an entrepreneur in Birmingham, Alabama. So we're excited to present this panel to you, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Majella Chube Hamilton, who is our moderator for this evening's panel. Thank you, and enjoy this view.
Hello, everyone. I'm Majella Chube Hamilton, Executive Director of the Ballard House Project in Birmingham, Alabama. We are definitely extremely excited about, excited about this evening and so much of the rich legacy. I wanted to share with you that the Ballard House Project is a partner with Urban Impact in this venture, and we are so excited about that. We have worked together tremendously throughout the Birmingham Civil Rights District along with other stakeholders, and this is another opportunity for us to share the many facets of the rich history of the African American experience. The Ballard House Project is a cultural storehouse, a cultural space for meeting, as well as a place where we have gathered, documented. We're in the process of preserving and celebrating the history of the African American community in Birmingham, all throughout and around the metropolitan area of Birmingham. We have a shared legacy that is a part of the building and development of the city of Birmingham, as well as throughout the development of the state of Alabama. And this is an opportunity for us to share some of that information with you about the movers and the shakers who played a contributing role in the development of the Birmingham's early as well as mid-20th century Black business district. So this afternoon we have a tremendous, just a tremendous level of expertise and shared experiences, personal experiences. Attorney J. Mason Davis is going to share his insight with us. Ms. Carol Kirby, who is the owner of Kirby Insurance Company here in the 4th Avenue Business District, as well as Mr. Victor Blackledge. Mr. Blackledge is an architect and historic preservationist, and he is formerly Director of Historic Preservation with the City of Birmingham. So they all have a tremendous level of experience. So let's go ahead and get started. So Attorney Davis, would you share some insight, because you have really been a keeper of so much of the history of the African American community in Birmingham, and you have just spent your free time studying and researching more information. Can you share some insight with us?
Yes, my name is J. Mason Davis, and I am a retired senior partner at the Birmingham, Alabama law firm of Cerrone and Permont. I'm from one of two early families that moved to Birmingham in the early 1890s. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in the presentation that I'm going to make. And this presentation begins at the beginning of Birmingham in 1871. And I will take it up through maybe the 1960s, and Carol Kirby, McElderry, will continue after then. Birmingham was founded by many investors of the Ealerton Land Company, who were from the north. Daniel Pratt, a cotton gin builder and broker, was from New England, as was Truman Aldrich, son-in-law of John D. Rockefeller, among others. Mr. Aldrich was an owner of coal mines and an investor in the Pratt Coal and Iron Company that owned coal mines in Jefferson County. Mr. Pratt and his son-in-law, Henry DeBart Laban, the founder of Bessemer, were also in the coal business, as well as associated with the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company that was the predecessor of United States Steel in this area. When the city of Birmingham was founded in 1871, the 15th Amendment giving the right to vote to blacks had been passed the year before in 1870. The Civil War was only ended 6 years before the founding of the city of Birmingham. The passage of the 13th and 14th Amendments came between the end of the Civil War and the founding of the city of Birmingham, namely in 1865 and 1870. The Civil War was only ended 6 years before the founding of the city of Birmingham. The passage of the 13th and 14th Amendments came between the end of the Civil War and the founding of the city of Birmingham, namely in 1865 and 1868, respectively. Africans were kidnapped from the African coast and brought to America by ships owned and operated by New Englanders, and they were really financed by New York banks, and then made slaves by the cotton planters who had bought us and made property to be owned, movements controlled, diets determined by others, and working from sunup to sundown without pay. They were also subject to disciplines that were in the form of being beaten by bullwhips. When the industrialists opened their ore, coal, and limestone mines and quarries, blacks who had worked a few plantations in Jefferson County were employed and worked for substandard wages after the founding of the city of Birmingham. They were brought in to work during the final years of Reconstruction, namely 1870 to 1875. After the end of Reconstruction, in 1876, Jim Crow laws were instituted, resegregating the workforce, housing, schools, and the business community. The Reconstruction legislature had been the source of the founding of the public school system in the state of Alabama. Around the end of the 1880s, black businesses were given license to do business in the city of Birmingham and sprung up all over the city, including the Alabama Penny Savings Bank in 1888, and many barbershops, beauty shops, tailoring establishments, seamstresses, cooks, and cafes. It is to be noted that many of the black barbers opened shops in the white business community and catered to a solely white clientele. I knew 3 of them. During the 1890s, Dr. A.M. Brown, a physician, and his brothers, Dr. Will Brown, a dentist, and attorney E.A. Brown, a lawyer, came to Birmingham to conduct their various practices. A short time later, Dr. U.G. Mason, Dr. Bill Lacey, a dentist, L.L. Chambliss, a lawyer, came on the scene. Dr. U.G. Mason was a cousin of my grandfather, W.C. Davis, and he and another cousin, Mr. James Julian, who was the father of Dr. Percy Julian, a noted chemist who sold his patents on paint to the Glidden Paint Company and also worked for them, also maintained his private chemistry practice.
Is that from, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that from Marion County?
Yeah, no, from Perry County.
Perry County.
But the main city in that town is Marion.
Marion.
That's right. And that's where Julian Bond's father, Horace Mann Bond, began his initial education experience.
Right, that's right, in the school.
That's right. And that school was known as Lincoln Normal.
That's right.
And it was founded by the Congregational Church.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know what the Congregational Church is, they were the abolitionists who caused the Civil War. My other grandfather, C.M. Harris, and his sister had a Davenport founded Davenport and Harris Funeral Home in 1899. That business is still operating and is still owned by the Harris family and operated by the fourth generation of Harrises. Dr. Pettiford, pastor of 16th Street Baptist Church, and other black investors opened the Alabama Penny Savings Bank and operated from 1888 until 1915. It built the 5-story building on the west side of 18th Street North between 3rd and 4th Avenues. That building is still standing today and was purchased from the Penny Savings Bank by the Knights of Pythias. Many of the physicians, dentists, and lawyers that had been housed in a building that still stands on the southwest corner of 18th Street and 3rd Avenue moved into the brand new Penny Savings Bank building that had been constructed by the bank a couple of years before it went out of business. It is said that the bank took on too much debt in the construction of the building and at the same time the purchase of 2 other black-owned banks, the Prudential that was owned by Dr. U.G. Mason and the Lauderdale Bank. Later, the black business community moved a block further west, and that community was anchored by the Masonic Temple building that was constructed in 1923. And many of the newer professionals and businesses took offices there. When I began my practice in 1960, I occupied the former offices of attorney Arthur D. Shores, who had moved to a newer building that was built on the corner of 5th Avenue and 16th Street North by Dr. A.G. Gaston and the Booker T. Washington Insurance Company. I practiced with 2 other African-American lawyers, namely attorney Peter A. Hall and attorney Orzel Billingsley Jr. They both became judges later. For 3 years before taking separate space down the hall on the 5th floor of the Masonic Temple building. After I'd been in practice for 10 years or more, Houston Lanier Brown decided he would go to law school, and he clerked for me during his law school career and began practicing with me after graduation and being licensed. The same is true of Robert A. Jones, Jr. and David Sullivan. Mr. Brown is now retired presiding circuit judge Houston Lanier Brown Sr. Around the Masonic Temple building on 4th and 5th Avenues, 18th, 17th, 16th, and 15th Streets, the black business community moved as a result of redlining by the City of Birmingham. Down between 14th and 15th Streets was the Fornes building, in which the first black radio station, WEDR, began operating in the late 1940s, and I checked, it was 1949, along with the Fornes Printing Company. Fornes was in the printing business for many, many years and only stopped in the late 1970s. On the corner of 15th Street and 4th Avenue was the Eccles and Strong Funeral Home that later became known as the Mary E. Strong Funeral Home, and a building where I lived during my initial years of life on the corner of 16th Street and 5th Avenue North in 1935 to 1936 was bought by A.G. Gaston when he brought his Smith & Gaston Funeral Home from Fairfield into Birmingham to operate, and also the Booker T. Washington Insurance Company. Later, the Booker T. Washington Insurance Company bought a building on the corner of 5th Avenue and 17th Street and did business there along with Dr. Mitchell, Dr. D.B. Mitchell, who was an optometrist who had his own practice and also worked with Epps Jewelry. In the Masonic Temple building that is still standing today on the corner of 4th Avenue and 17th Street North were located all the black-owned life insurance companies that did business in the state of Alabama. They were the Atlanta Life Insurance Company, the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, the Pilgrim Health and Life Insurance Company, the Afro-American Life Insurance Company, and the Protective Industrial Insurance Company that grew out of Davenport and Harris Funeral Home in 1923 and was also owned by the Harris family. Many of the black physicians, dentists, druggists, barber, and beauty shops, as well as photographers, tailors, and pool rooms were also located in the Masonic Temple building. The Jones Valley Finance Company was also located in the building, as were the Grand Lodge of the Masonic Order and its endowment department. The 4th Avenue Business District was anchored by Bob's Little Savoy Cafe.
Wow.
I can go on, but I'm going to stop at that point.
And the thing is that this is really just a sliver of all of the many different African-American businesses and workers, because we can't forget the workers that were basically making sure that these businesses were also successful.
That's right.
And those that were living in other parts of the Birmingham community, those that were working as laborers, as miners, as those that were building railroads and working in other companies and factories that were coming in and out of this district that was extremely productive, had so much going on, and had a really wonderful interconnectedness in terms of community members. And so I wanted to ask if Carol Kirby McElderry could share some of her thoughts and insights about African American businesses and community.
Certainly. I want to first say it's an honor to be serve on this panel today, and I don't know why I get the pleasure of following our resident Birmingham historian, which to whom I cannot compete with. Nonetheless, I want to set the stage for the reflections that I want to share today, and perhaps we'll address some of the reasons why I consider the 4th Avenue District to be special, and to address some of your points, Majella. From a historical perspective, in the late 1950s, my maternal grandmother, Carrie Calloway Gardner, opened Fuller Products as a franchisee to wholesale cosmetic and household goods. And this was developed from a Chicago-based parent company of Fuller Products, which was started by H.J. Fuller. And the business was located at 312 16th Street North from 1950s until 1989, when she retired at the age of 85. Another personal note is that my paternal grandfather, David Kirby, owned Kirby and Sons Tailoring Shop, which was situated north of the 4th Avenue Business District, and the resident historian here can give us some more insight that many of the black businesses were not started in this district area. And he was located at 22nd Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenues. And then later in September of 1963, my father, Clyde Kirby, opened Kirby Insurance Agency, which continues today, and it happened to have been situated right next door to Fuller Products, who my grandmother owned at 314 16th Street North. And I often say that, you know, my grandmother is my inspiration, but I'm not sure that I inherited all of her energy genes because I just don't know if I can make that run until 85. Nonetheless, I guess I say that historical fact because it kind of sets the stage for the fact that that the district has really served as a backdrop for my family's legacy. And I often have to chuckle when I think about the fact that I consider that the district was really my summer camp experience because I started spending time in the district around the age of 6, and I would spend time stocking the shelves at Fuller Products, and then I'd run next door to help eventually type policies and invoices and do filing at Kirby Insurance. But many of the places that Attorney Davis has mentioned, I'm having a visual reflection of those now because they were real for me. They were real for me. And having said that, you know, for many of us, we were able to witness lawyers and doctors and barbers and ministers, as he alluded to. And I want to say that my options were actually vast and unlimited. You know, there's a lot to be said about the fact that exposure and encouragement are huge influencers to our future dreams. You know, I considered the district to be really my extended family, if you will. And it was a village that we often so hear people talk about. So even given the fact that we were surrounded with many reality issues in terms of the limitations that segregation brought about, I still considered this my district and my village. And it certainly gave me some grounding for confidence. And as I said, just my view of what was possible. So having said that, I guess preserving legacy is what keeps me committed to the evolution and the possibilities of the Fourth Avenue District. There's one thing, however, that is troubling to me about our existence today, and that is that far too many young people don't have access to witnessing the possibilities of living beyond a survival status, or even witnessing some of the things that I alluded to earlier. So we've got tremendous work to do, I think, in this regard. And not only do we have the challenge of giving young people examples of possibilities, but also ensuring that younger generations know the history of business legacies. The topic that was advertised, Nobody Knows My Name, taps directly into my concerns. It's like, how will my children or my grandchildren know what the black business movers, who were the black business movers and shakers? I want to just take a minute to just share a few as a part of today's documentary. For instance, in my own neighborhood of South Titusville, where I was born and raised, there was W.L. Williams Grocery, McKinney's Groceries, Armstrong's Groceries, Bowman's and Fortune's Groceries. We didn't have a food desert, as we allude to now. We even had vegetable trucks rolling as well. There was a Piggy's TV sales and repair store there on 6th Avenue. There was a Miles Dry Cleaners and Mason's gasoline service station. In the downtown area, we had the Citizens Federal Bank building, the Forness, Rapid, Weeding, printing companies, Temple and Citizens Pharmacies, Protective Industrial, Booker T. Washington Insurance Company, and on the Gaston Motel. I won't, because he's given us a history on that. But my point is that the district and the surrounding neighborhoods were well positioned to service the needs of the living and the dead. And when I think about the array of businesses that's really, you know, I think that these business owners really took heart and learned to master the notion of find a need, provide the service. You know, there was a whole list, and if you just go down the list, you can see they found a need and they provided a service. My only prayer, I think, at this point, through all of these experiences, is that the footprints of these movers and these shakers that have walked the surfaces of the Fourth Avenue Business District, that they won't be forgotten. And in fact, people will, in fact, know their names.
Absolutely, because we should all know their names, and that's what's so critical and important. And this is an opportunity for us to share as much as we can, but that interconnectedness that both of you mentioned was critical to the district. It's considered, and it was considered an ecosystem, an economic and community ecosystem, where, you know, there were people from all walks of life engaging in business and going to church. There were numerous churches in this district. And as you've mentioned, both of you have mentioned, many of those businesses did not start in this district. Some of those businesses started all across the city of Birmingham based on my research, and they were pushed and moved and marginalized. And what did they do? They made something wonderful from what they had, because they were skilled, they had a business mindset, and they were interested in caring for their communities and for their families. And so there was that cultural component that was so critical for this particular area. And I think that that's why I'd like to share a little later about one of the some of the other African American business owners. But Victor Blackledge, who has worked quite a bit through the years in terms of helping to not only preserve this district, but to help to tell the story and to shape the guidelines and the parameters of these districts in this area so that coming generations will know what took place here. Please share some insight with us.
My name is Blackledge, Victor Blackledge Jr., and I guess I should begin at the beginning. God has a plan. He always has a plan. I was introduced to the 4th Avenue District when I was in 10th grade.
And the 4th Avenue
Kirby
District,
Theater.
just a note I want to make, formerly the district was called Birmingham's Black Business District.
Exactly.
And it is known now as the 4th Avenue Business District.
The historic 4th Avenue Business District, if you don't mind. I would come down primarily to go to the show, the Kirby Theater, and the activity on the block was literally fascinating. I was always bent toward entrepreneurism. I was the paper boy and fixed bikes. My cousin, Sam Moore, introduced me to now attorney U.W. Clemens, Mr. Comer, W.L. Williams, and Sam was teaching me how to draw. That is, floor plans, to put things together. On the 5th floor of the Masonic Building. Mm-hmm. I had a part-time job at the Bruno's store there on 26th Street, and after my shift was over, I would walk downtown and go to the 5th floor, pull out my drawing table and start drawing. But Sam had put me next to the window where I could see all the activities on the block. And there was constantly something going on. Not knowing what my role was in God's plan, after finishing the military and architecture at Hampton Institute, I got a job as the first urban designer hired on with degree by Mike Dobbins in the City of Birmingham as an urban designer. Mary Abington had, along with Councilman Blankenship, had this idea of urban impact. And they had put together an organization who was commissioned solely to take care of the 4th Avenue Business District. That we tagged under commercial revitalization, my specialty. Mike, who's an architect, ingrained in me initially, you can't render a service without a client. You've got to come down on the block, and that's what I fondly refer to it as. Meet the merchants. Right. Understand what they do, what products they deliver, how they deliver it, and work with them on what they think is the optimum atmosphere to stay alive and to do business. At that time, the business district was feeling the impact of desegregation, because prior to then, they were restricted to being within the Black business district. I've oftentimes had some introspectives on what my job was, and it was largely to enforce the zoning laws. But the more I learned about pure zoning and what it was, initially it was my enemy, because it caused me to do some things that I knew and felt were wrong. But then ultimately, the more I thought about it, I said, well, I'm in pocket. I've got to enforce this. And then this little man in the back of my head, well, do it your way.
Do it by preserving.
do it by preserving, do it by knowing what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
Put the program together to make it serve the merchants as opposed to victimize them. On discussion with my director, Dobbins, Mike Dobbins, he agreed, and he took that message to the mayor's office. And Councilman Blankenship, whose district the 4th Avenue Business District was in, put together the program. And
that was the creation.
that
of
was the
Urban
birth of
Impact.
urban impact.
Wonderful.
It's
Yes.
probably good to know too. I would imagine you were the only African American in the department handling
I was.
architectural issues at that time.
I was.
Yes.
And
And you were able to establish a connection with the owners and those who manage the businesses and the churches as
working
well.
through urban impact,
Mm-hmm.
that was what I had to achieve. Nathan Hicks and Lillian Hill
Mm-hmm.
were my eyes and ears on the street.
Yes.
The things that we put together as it relates to, we had some really simple objectives, but that turned out to be some very in-depth cultural headaches that the merchants didn't agree with, didn't like. And Mike had told me that you know you're doing your job well when you get the merchants to the point that they can accept your saying no. When they know that you've done your absolute best, but just plain can't pull it off. Signs and windows was a big headache. I didn't understand from the beginning. They had to sit me down, discuss it, and let me know what the real deal was. Once I got a grip on it, and it was largely an administrative decision, and I carried the load on that, that if the sign didn't look like the signs that was on the Position building and on the Lovemans, they still carried the message that they wanted to carry. And beauty of it all was I was the one to sign off on the rebate that was going along with the cost of it. Didn't have to account to nobody for that.
Input on that. When I first came into the district, into the business, I actually did the design review presentation to the committee for my block.
There you
And
go.
of course, I was inexperienced at the time, didn't have all of the technical equipment, so I used a poster board to actually paste in what the signs would look like and,
Right.
you know, the curtain, the window treatments and all of that. It was when I think back about how I did that presentation. With,
That was before I was hired.
Okay.
After I was hired, it was my job to take a look at your board and to put it in a format that was professional and informative.
And Victor, share with me though a little bit more, share with the audience here a little bit more about your just memories of the community. Memories of the community.
4th Avenue was the block, you know. When we finally came through with the actual hard brick and mortar revitalizations, I knew enough about the activities on 4th Avenue to put a chessboard out there on the sidewalk.
Yes.
We actually built it there so they don't have to drag tables and stuff out there and get in people's way. We put a chess table out there because I knew they played chess, and that was appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
What I had to do was one, to get to know people, to get to know them by name, Mr. Nelson, and that was something that I picked up on. Regardless of what their street name was, I would learn their full given name and
Right.
approach everybody as Mr. and Mrs.
And I know that made a tremendous difference because it was that human component and professionalism that you provided, and I think that was a tremendous contribution. In addition to the insight and the experience that you brought, and the the struggle that I know that likely took place in not just in policy and legislation, but just in making sure that others understood that this is a district that's distinct within itself. It should be valued and it should be preserved. And we truly appreciate what you were able to do during your time frame there.
And that was the objective. The primary objective came directly from the mayor.
Mayor Richard
That
Arrington
we learned
Jr.
out on the block. It was our job to go back and actually write up a report to send down to his office to let him know what happened. Consequently, we put together the 4th Avenue Land Bank.
Okay, tell us about that.
Before I go any further, that's the only bank that stays eternally broke. There was no money put in the land bank. We had to adopt a policy of sell and buy as opposed to buy and sell. By that I mean we would identify the merchants who wanted to go into a building or buy the building that they were in.
Right,
That was a big component
because
of
one
the
of the things
redevelopment.
that was discovered was that at least at that point in time, in maybe the 80s, that many of the business owners did not own their buildings.
That was the problem. Then that's the problem that the land bank solved.
Right.
We would work with the merchants and their bank, identify what improvements, what building they wanted to purchase, because a lot of times they wanted to move to a larger facility.
Space.
Identify what building they wanted to purchase, how much it costs, retain an architect to go in there and make the improvements. Bottom line figure encompassed all of that. And the city would in fact purchase the building, make the improvements, and my job was to sell it to that merchant for exactly what we paid for, but under terms. We got some 50 and 60-year mortgages down there to make it fit that merchant's financial situation, and it worked like a gym.
Well, I think that it's very, very important that each of you has shared thus far a different aspect as well as some overlapping aspects of this particular district. I personally would like to share just some diversity just within this building. I mean, when you think about the fact that an African-American physician, Dr. Edward Ballard, in the late 1920s, moved to Birmingham. He was originally practicing in the Masonic Temple, moved into the Ballard, the building here on this foundation, had a very productive, extremely successful practice, but worked with other physicians throughout the community in order to lift and help the community in very difficult times during the era of Jim Crow. And then when he left Birmingham in 1950, he sold the building to Miss Jessie Perkins. She was a woman before her time, and there were so many, including your relatives, Carol, and she owned ultimately more than, we believe, 7 locations, 7 businesses in this, just in this district area. And the Ballard House was one of those buildings where she opened this building up to clubs, organizations, for community service, for civic meetings, for civil rights strategy sessions, for all kinds of initiatives. And she would also house, before A.G. Gadsden built the A.G. Gadsden Motel, she housed individuals upstairs in the bedrooms who were here visiting ministers and or entertainers or speakers who came to Birmingham. And so there were people like her, so many other men and women who really were very innovative and extremely determined to make sure that they assisted their community. And this was part of who they were. And then it goes down to Dr. Herschel Hamilton. And he was not the only physician that practiced here, but he set up an emergency space here to treat foot soldiers in the civil rights movement. So just in one location in this Black business district, the diversity of experiences and of contributions to the building and development of Birmingham. Yeah.
And I think what's significant to note on that, Majella, is that you will find that there are many heirs of those people. Dr. Hamilton, of course, his son is now back in the district. I happen to be one that's back in the district. I often say that, you know, I was not destined, or I was not supposed to come back to Birmingham after finishing Spelman. I was, you know, Atlanta was quite attractive at the time. But in my reflections, and I think, you know, I'm going to interject this little point. You know, back in the desegregation days, there were places, as I talked about, that encased this area which were not available to us to go even eat. I can recall going into the Lovemans and Pozitz building and hearing the clinging of the dishes and what have you upstairs on the mezzanine, which sparked my curiosity as to why is that prohibited for me. Only later to become a teen board member of the Pozitz department store, and ended up finally going up those mysterious steps.
Right.
And you know, even, and so, and then you find yourself here back in the same grounds that served as your foundational beginning. And so when you talk about destiny, and you often wondered why you were in that position,
Exactly.
you know, I really do believe it's destiny.
It's like sacred grounds, actually. It really is, especially the Kelly Ingram Park area, and but the district is a very special place. And what I appreciate is the fact that so many individuals and organizations are working in order to renovate and to restore and to revitalize this community, because this district has so many neighborhoods that surround it, and that in it is itself is part of the Fountain Heights neighborhood. But then we have Enon Ridge, we have Smithfield, and we have so many other communities that also contributed to the growth and development of this district. You know, would you like to share anything about that?
Yeah, Fountain Heights and Enon Ridge are really one community. It was divided at 6th Street, where whites lived to the east of 6th Street and blacks lived to the west. And it was a very nice place to live. You had a community of people that owned their own property. And that was not just in one portion of it, it was all over Enon Ridge. It began down at 11th Avenue. That area was anchored by the Miller Memorial Presbyterian Church. Then you came up the hill up to Tuggle School, and that was the anchor for the top of the hill. Then you went back a little further, and that was Enon Methodist Church. That was the anchor for that area. And you had a number of businessmen that built houses there. My grandfather, C.M. Harris, bought in 1904, and he built a house for his family. He had 10 children, so he had to have a pretty large house. And then they put that house on logs and turned it around and rolled it to the back end of the lot, and they built a house on the 4th Place side. And back during that time, 4th Place was known as Center Street.
Right.
And in 1930, my other grandfather, W.C. Davis, built a house that was similar to his brother-in-law's house,
Right.
C.M. Harris, and he was on the very top on 12th Avenue and 4th Way.
And I do want to mention, you mentioned Tuggle School, and we don't have the opportunity to go into the very, just the excellent educator and educators that we have and have had in Birmingham, including Carrie Tuggle,
Yeah, well,
who
that school
opened
started-
Tuggle Institute.
That school started as a private school,
That's right.
and it was supported by the Order of the Calanthes,
That's right, which was an affiliate
of the Knights of Pythias.
That's right.
That's right. And you had Jewish merchants that would give money to their wives, because Mrs. Pozitz and Mrs. Loveman would come up there and they would teach. at Tuggle School.
As well as the fact that there were many, many African-American educators that taught there.
That's right.
And the members of the Kalanthas and the Knights of Pythians were completely financially supportive of that for so many years. So we'll save that for another conversation, but I do want to mention the fact that one of the reasons why Enon Ridge was one of the few places where homes were being built was because of the segregation and the laws that restricted African Americans from building homes in so many different communities in Birmingham. And Victor, you may want to talk about that a little bit, but that is critical because more and more African Americans would have had the opportunity earlier on, but in 1926, that those housing codes really made a lot of restrictions, and it designated certain areas.
Actually, imagine that process has a name. It's called zoning.
Which is what you were
Land use and zoning, exactly. And when I first went to City Hall, there was no place for me to work or to sit, so they stuck me in a little corner there on the 5th floor. And there was a bunch of literal trash around. In the process of cleaning out a spot for me to work, I found this map. It caught my attention because it was drawn on linen, and I knew that to be antique, really. Right. So I opened up and took a look at it, and the thing was 16 feet long, 5 feet tall. It was done in 1926. The original zoning map for the city of Birmingham. Birmingham was one of 5 cities nationally that was bold enough to codify segregation. And that map was a representation of it. What it actually represented was where white folks could live and white Negroes, and sometimes they refer to as just non-white, could live. And that's when they drew the lines.
Yes.
That's what established the redlining.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
On the block.
So there was already a template in place for banks and other companies to use.
It lent toward the demise, if you will, of the black business district. Because we were accustomed, if I was a barber and had barbering skills, all I wanted was something with 4 walls and a roof over it and some clippers, and I'm good to go. Well, zoning says you cannot. There are only certain places that you can operate a business, certain businesses you can operate, and in being there, there are parking spaces you have to provide, and the whole 9 yards. What my involvement and job turned out to be was keeping the merchants in compliance with those buildings, but make sure the city complied with its responsibility too, in terms of making sure that your plumbing worked, making sure you had power service to that location without additional expenses. In other locations, those was just given.
Yes.
But in ours, it was the option of somebody downtown as to whether or not they wanted you to have running water or not.
Well, you know, one of the things that, and we're running out of time, but I do want to, you know, share that Birmingham, from its inception, as we know from its early decades, had no less than about 40% on average in those early years of African Americans in this city, and in many decades consisted of many more African Americans. And of course, we know Birmingham today is predominantly African American. However, during those eras prior to the civil rights movement, during the many decades leading into the movement, Jim Crow was at its height. And it wasn't just in housing, it was segregation and discrimination. People were denied the right to vote, or they had to jump over a number of different hoops just to get an opportunity to vote, whether it be poll taxes or being asked questions regarding the Constitution, whether or not you could read, all of those aspects. And of course, it was codified in other ways in terms of the streetcars and where separation in the buses and those kinds of things. As we are closing out, I just wanted to ask if any of you wanted to talk about that, because what's inspiring for me is how African Americans throughout those decades persisted and they resisted. They survived and they thrived, even despite all of those limitations and restrictions and difficulties.
The redlining that Victor talked about was put there so that the banks could decide whether or not they wanted to lend money to a person who wanted to buy or to sell or to just mortgage his property to get working capital. The thing that is not talked about very frequently is that the change in the form of government of the City of Birmingham in 1963 is the fulcrum for the ending of the demonstrations. The reason why the change in the form of government came about was because the white business community had gotten tired of Bull Connor and his restrictions on growth.
Because there was a 3-member commission.
That's right.
And he was one of those commissioners.
He was one. Jabbo Waggoner, who is a senator today, his father, Jabbo, was the second one, and the third one was Art Haynes.
That was a name for it? Boycott
Boycott.
and negotiations.
But we didn't use the
And
word
Fred Schultz wasn't backing
boycott.
off.
We used the word selective buying because boycott
Okay.
would have caused you to be arrested under the state statutes.
Right.
But the ultimate end was to bring them to the negotiating table.
That's right. But they
Absolutely.
would not have come to the negotiations and signed the agreements unless Bull was out of office. Because
That
if
was
he
part of
had
the
not been out
negotiations.
of office, they would not have come, because not only was he in charge of the police and the fire, he was in charge of giving the licenses that those merchants needed to do business.
And
Well-
we're looking down the throat at it now. On November 4th, we have a chance to use that tool that sealed the deal, and that was your vote.
That's
Well,
right.
that's
when
why
the coalition
that is
That's
a
right.
came about.
perfect. That
and
is a
Birmingham started voting collectively to put in place who they wanted.
The 4,000 votes that passed the change in the form of government came from Precinct 9 that consisted of the blacks that lived in Tittersville, Elerton, Smithfield, Enon Ridge, and Fountain Heights.
And the
so
more
they
things
were
changed,
able
the
to
more they
create
remained the
a
same.
That's right.
9-member council.
That's right.
And that is the change that took place during that particular vote.
That's right.
And the fact when you have a greater share of the population, which is part of our democratic principles and which this nation is founded upon, that all will have the opportunity to vote. That's critical, because then their voices are able to be heard, and in policy, in legislation, as well as when it comes to their leaders.
That's right.
So I think that certainly made a difference, a major difference in terms of turning around what took place in Birmingham and the growth and the opportunities that came after that for so many.
You know, one of the things, Matt, when we talk about the growth of the Fourth Avenue Business District, and you mentioned the Titusville neighborhood community. What I always find interesting, and I don't know what the actual percentage is, but a great number of the homes there,
Yes.
blacks bought the land and they built their own houses.
That's right.
And I
That's
would
right.
think that's very significant for that community, for us to understand that, because I think in some of the other neighborhoods, we migrated into and bought, as a second purchase. But for that community, the people bought the land, built their homes,
And that
Homes that they built
were built
were
by,
were drawn, the plans for those houses were drawn by
Gilliam.
Wallace Rayfield, who lived in South Ealaton.
And one of the things about that, in addition to here in this downtown business district, is that in the Black Business District, what is now 4th Avenue Business District, is that the interconnectedness of people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, living right next to each other, working right next to each other, having a level of respect and understanding and camaraderie. That is what this district is all about. And I know that the same it was the same case in Titusville. We have so much more to talk about. I know that we are, though, getting very low on time. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for being here this afternoon. We've only uncovered just a little part of the surface as it relates to Birmingham's Black Business District, the movers and the shakers. We have covered a wide span in terms of historical, in terms of years, but let this be just the beginning of many future conversations that we'll continue to have, because this is so important that we ourselves know our history and make sure that others know and appreciate our history so that we can all move forward together. This is a shared experience. It may be the experience of the African American community, but it is the experience of Birmingham, and it is a shared historical experience, and it's important for everyone to be aware of it. Okay.
and perhaps next time we have this conversation, we don't have to have this unfortunate presentation.
I know. I hope that we can have this conversation without masks.
Exactly.
But thank you to each and every one of you. This is Attorney J. Mason Davis, Mrs. Carol Kirby McElderry, Mr. Victor Blackledge. We thank you for joining us here at the
It's our
Ballard
pleasure.
House. And I am Majella Chube Hamilton, and thank you for joining us. And we will see you again at the next session.
Wow, wasn't that powerful? I want to thank Ms. Majella Chube Hamilton for guiding this wonderful conversation with our panel. Again, my name is Ivan Holloway, and I serve as Executive Director of Urban Impact, which you heard a little bit about through the panel presentation. Our role is to reinvest, ignite, and excite you guys about development and the redevelopment of the historic 4th Avenue Business District, as we learned today. More importantly, the African American Black Business District of Birmingham. As we close today, I want you to think about the history that we talked about today, but I want it to help you understand that there is more opportunity in the future. We have gained so much traction as a race of people, and I think that this is only a stepping stone. So we should use this as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to extend, and as an opportunity to connect. So this time next week, we'll be focusing on architecture in the civil rights and the 4th Avenue Business District. We will feature design, construction, as well as the built environment. So I invite you to join our panel next week on Facebook Live as we discuss the importance of architecture and design, as well as planning for a district that deserves preservation, but it also deserves its spot in the spotlight for its history. But I'd like to say it also deserves its light in the spotlight for its future. And you can become a part of its future. Lastly, I'd just like you to participate with us with our Northwest Downtown Quadrant planning effort through our website. I won't send you directly to that website because I want you to learn a little bit more about urban impact. So go to urbanimpact.org and then look for the Northwest Quadrant, and then you could be connected to both entities, both the planning effort as well as our organizational efforts. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you will join us on the 29th for our last installment